What do you do when the government disrespects your faith and they try to force you to do something that is against your beliefs, or they're teaching your children something in school that is against your faith? What do you do? 3,000 healthcare workers in America right now are suing the Biden administration for trying to force them to perform sex change surgeries. This is very important. I'm talking about this today on a segment called God versus Government. I'm also interviewing author Mark Hitchcock on his book, ISIS, Iran, Israel, in the End of Days. We're talking about what's happening in the Middle East, also what's happening with Russia, and I'm answering your questions. I'm Jimmy Evans. Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. Welcome to today's show, and as I said in the opening, I want to talk about this issue of when government disrespects your faith, and what do you do? And right now I'm going to read you some of this article from the Christian Post. It says 3,000 healthcare workers sue Biden administration over mandate forcing them to perform sex change surgeries. And this is by Michael Grabowski. Let me read you just a little bit about this. This says, two associations representing 3,000 medical professionals and an individual doctor based in Tennessee have filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration's transgender mandate, arguing that it violates federal conscience protection laws. The American College of Pediatricians and the Catholic Medical Association, along with Dr. Jeannie Dassow of Chattanooga, filed the suit last week in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Tennessee at Chattanooga. At issue in the court's case is the HHS's current interpretation of Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, which bars sex discrimination to include requiring doctors to perform elective gender transition procedures, including cosmetic surgeries such as double mastectomies, philosophies, and orchiotomies, which is testicle removal. This case challenges whether the federal government can make medical doctors perform gender transition surgeries, prescribe gender transition drugs, and speak and write about patients according to gender identity rather than biological reality, regardless of doctors' medical judgment or conscientious objections, noted the introduction of a lawsuit. One other line I'll read here. Our clients are rightfully objecting on medical, ethical, religious, and conscientious grounds to this unlawful government mandate to provide gender transition procedures. Well, let me first of all begin by saying if a person is struggling with their gender, they deserve compassion. I don't want anything that I say in this segment to be interpreted as hate or coming down on people who are struggling with their sexuality, because a lot of people are today, and we have an environment now that is literally fostering confusion. Let me give you an example of this, because I'm going to read you an excerpt from an article in just a minute where in Scotland they're allowing 4-year-olds to transition without their parents' knowledge. And so when you begin to introduce the concept to a child that they may be a different sex than what they are biologically, the parents are there to guide children, not to confuse them. And they need answers from parents, not questions. And so some parents are saying, well, I'm raising my child gender neutral and I'm going to let them decide. A 4-year-old that can't decide whether to have a puppy is supposed to decide whether they're a male or a female, and if they have surgery, it cannot be reversed. So let me go to these doctors for just a minute. 3,000 healthcare workers are suing the Biden administration. Many more healthcare workers are involved in this. These are just the ones involved in the lawsuit. And they're saying you cannot force us to perform these elective surgeries. Now, let me say, when you perform these sexual transition surgeries, no sex has been transitioned. When you do the cosmetic surgery, it is 100% cosmetic. When you take a man and you do all the testicle removal and the breast implants, when you do everything you've done, all the hormone treatments, he's still a man. It's simply cosmetic. He looks like a woman now, but he's still a man. You do the same thing to a woman, she's still a woman. You haven't changed anyone's sex. It is all pretense. It's all cosmetic. So, and it cannot be reversed. And this is the important point here. It's one thing to put makeup on or dress up like the opposite sex, because you can take that makeup off and you can change clothes. But when you take a child or even an adult and you cut off their genitals, you can't replace those genitals. And 60 Minutes did a special. The very well-respected news organization 60 Minutes did a special on the growing number of people who have regrets about their sex change surgery. There is a website I encourage you to go to. It's called sexchangeregret.com. And the man who has that site transitioned to a woman. His grandmother dressed him up in girls' clothing as a little boy, and it confused him sexually. He lived as a woman for many years, finally came to Christ, realized that he was chasing the wrong thing, transitioned back, not physically, but just emotionally, transitioned back to being a man, and now he lives to help people avoid the same mistakes that he did. And on his website are the testimonies of the many, many people who had sex change surgeries and lived to regret it. 41%, this statistic is on his website, 41% of people who have sex change surgeries attempt suicide afterwards. That doesn't sound like happy customers to me. And some people say, well, the reason they attempt suicide is because they're bullied. No, the reason that they attempt suicide is because they woke up thinking that they would be different down there, and they're dead down there. The sex change surgery didn't change their sex, it destroyed their sex. So if I'm a medical professional, which I'm not, but if I were a medical professional as a Christian, and you put a child or an adult in my care and told me that I had to do something to them that would destroy their sexuality and that was irreversible, I could not do it in conscience before God, because the Hippocratic Oath says, do no harm. Sex change surgeries do harm to people that cannot be reversed. And later on, and I'm thinking especially the little kids, it's one thing if an adult wants to do something, which is still wrong and bad, and no one should be forced to perform those surgeries. But for a child, a 4, 5-year-old, 6-year-old child, I'm just saying, as a junior high kid, I would have said I was a girl to get in the girls' locker room. I'm just telling you right now, I wasn't a girl, but I would have said it. I promise I would have said it every day to get in the girls' locker room. All this stuff is so open to interpretation, is so open to abuse. And so this is something that has to be stopped. And now the government is saying you must do something against your conscience. Okay, you don't do it. I'm just saying you just don't do it. And I applaud all the people standing up over this. I pray the Supreme Court, because it'll go to the Supreme Court, I pray that they will stand up for this, for our religious freedoms and the freedom of speech and all the freedoms that are involved in this. But this has never been done before in the United States of America. Now, Obama tried it with abortion, but President Trump repealed the mandate he tried to get doctors to perform abortions. President Trump repealed it, but now Biden's after it again. And so this is a big thing in the news. This is another article. Critics say Illinois' new sex ed guidelines promote abortion and sexualize students. This is from the Christian Post. Ryan Foley. Conservatives are criticizing the new sex education curriculum approved by Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, alleging that it will expose children to sexually charged content with an ideological agenda. Pritzker, a Democrat, signed Senate Bill 818 into law on August 20th. The legislation in part calls for the implementation of comprehensive personal health and safety and comprehensive sexual health education curriculum that aligns with the national sex education standards. In a statement, Pritzker praised the bill for modernizing our sex education standards. He predicted that the new curriculum will help keep our children safe and ensure important lessons like content and internet safety are taught in the classrooms. State Representative Tony McCombie, a Republican, blasted the bill as not age appropriate, according to NPR. The goal of sex education is to help young people grow into healthier sexual relationships and healthier adults, McCombie was quoted as saying. This bill is not age appropriate, it is sexually charged. NPR Illinois reports that a handful of Democrats have voiced concern that the new standards include material that is too explicit for elementary and middle school students. I'm skipping down here. The National Sex Education Standards call for students in kindergarten through second grade to define gender identity, and gender role stereotypes, and discuss the range of ways people express their gender and how gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. This is kindergarten through second grade, focused on gender. The curriculum, which is endorsed by LGBT advocacy group GLSEN and the Human Rights Campaign, as well as abortion organizers like Planned Parenthood, also informs young students about different kinds of families, including those with cohabiting and same-gender parents. Students in third through fifth grades will learn about masturbation, as well as the role hormones play in the physical, social, cognitive, and emotional changes during adolescence, and the potential role of hormone blockers on young people who identify as transgender. That's third through fifth grade. Additionally, students will be expected to distinguish between sex assigned at birth and gender identity and explain how they may or may not differ. Define and explain differences between cisgender, transgender, gender non-binary, and gender expansive and gender identity. The curriculum teaches students in this age group that gender expression and gender identity exist along a spectrum. So that's what they want to teach young children in Illinois. And so it says that it's sexualizing them and teaching them about abortion. I'm just thinking about myself in this situation, and I'm thinking, I honestly was 11 or 12 years old before the concept of sex was ever introduced to me. I never thought about it, especially, kindergarten, first and second grade and things like that. Girls were ugly and who cared? And so I was, almost a teenager before any of those things came to my mind. But imagine you're going to school and you're kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and they're teaching you these things that just have absolutely nothing to do with the way you're living your life, except to confuse you and except to indoctrinate you. And I'll say this to all the parents out there, because I know that a lot of parents are up in arms right now and they're going to school board meetings, and good for you. A lot of good educators, a lot of good teachers, a lot of good school districts. But the ones that are trying to indoctrinate your children, you need to stand up to them and force them to change or take your child out of those schools. I would never in a million years allow my children to go to a school to be indoctrinated and to be brainwashed like that. They are there to educate, math, writing, reading, all those kinds of science, all those kinds of things. They are not there to take the place of the parent. In many of the school districts that are the most liberal, they think parents are stupid, and they think they have to get that child away from you so that they can teach your child, because you don't have the ability to teach your child. I'm saying you know more about your child than they will ever know. Now, this is Scotland to let pupils age 4 change gender without their parents' consent. Now, this is true. The Scottish government has announced that children as young as 4 will be able to change their gender at school without their parents' consent under guidance introduced in the country. It was disclosed that any pupil who decides they want to switch gender must be supported and listened to in school following the Scottish government's advice. The guideline applies in primary schools where the youngest children are only age 4 or 5, because recognition and development of gender identity can occur at any age. That's what they're saying. It also tells teachers not to question a child who says they want to transition to live as a boy or a girl, and instead ask for their new name and pronouns. Primary and secondary schools have also been told to put books featuring transgender people on a curriculum, allows pupils to choose which changing room or toilets to use, and consider introducing a gender-neutral uniform. The guidance was branded shocking and led to concerns that children are being allowed to make life-changing decisions at too young an age. The advice says some young people are exploring their gender identity in primary settings. Primary schools need to be able to meet the needs of these young people to ensure a safe, inclusive, and respectful environment in which to learn. A section on changing name and recorded sex says children simply need to tell others informally that they want to use a different name, and they don't need to record this formally on their official school record. The advice to school staff on what to do if a child wants to discuss their gender includes asking what name and pronoun you should use to address them. So they're not telling the parents. They're very careful not to tell the parents. So in Scotland, the children can go to school, change their sexual identity at school, and the parents never know about it. Again, secretive from the parents. You say that couldn't happen in America. It happened in America. And this is an article from Prophecy Newswatch. It says, schools helping students to gender transition without parents' knowledge. This is by Tony Perkins, written March 1st of 2020. Imagine dropping your son off at school, never knowing that he lives a completely different existence as a girl for 8 hours a day, and everyone knows it but you. And not only do teachers know it, but they go to great lengths to hide it. That's the reality in Madison, Wisconsin, where moms and dads have been furious to find out that not only is the district keeping their children's gender expression a secret, but there's an elaborate scheme in place to keep parents from ever finding out. Most kids can't take an Advil at school without getting their parents' permission, but they can create a whole new identity without anyone calling home. Thanks to a policy passed on April 2018, this is new normal for anyone in Madison Public Schools, and unlike other areas of the country who've had to deal with the rogue principal here or there, this is a systemic, district-wide campaign to lie to parents and exploit their children. Under the district's official policy, a girl or boy of any age can transition to a different gender identity at school completely confidentially. They can go to their teacher and demand to be called a new name or pronoun, even use a different bathroom without their parents' okay. Even more amazingly, the district is forcing teachers and staff to take the lead in deceiving these families. Madison's policies order them to keep up appearances by using the kids' given names and pronouns whenever their parents are around. If a school employee is concerned that this new identity is creating problems or hurting the child, too bad. They're forbidden from bringing it up with the parents. So the government is now trying to force us to do things medically against our will, and they're trying to take our children against our knowledge and against our will and to indoctrinate them in something that could absolutely destroy the rest of their lives, sexually confuse them, even lead them to sex change surgeries that destroy their sexuality that cannot be undone later on. And so I'm saying in the book of Daniel, and this is an end times book, in Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are told by King Nebuchadnezzar that they must bow down to a 90-foot statue and worship it. And of course they won't do it, they're Jews, and they won't worship any God but God. And so they are told if they won't worship that image, they're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And they answered and said, we will not bow down and worship that image because God will rescue us. Even if He doesn't, we will not bow down and worship that image. They were thrown in the furnace. Jesus, the fourth man in the furnace, He met them there, saved them. They came out of the furnace without even their clothes smelling like smoke, and the king acknowledged that God was God. It was a fantastic thing. Daniel, King Darius told him, or they set him up, literally other leaders did, to where no one could pray to anyone except King Darius for 30 days. But Daniel opened the windows of his house and prayed 3 times a day. When he was found out, they threw him in the lion's den. And of course, God saved him from the lions, and later on the men who set him up were thrown into the lion's den and they were killed. In both instances, God came through for people who are willing to stand up for God versus government. This is not an anti-government speech. I'm not against the government. I'm against the government when they come against my faith. I have a most holy faith that guides my life. It is more important to me than anything else. And before I am an American, I am a Christian. Before I serve any president, I serve Jesus Christ. And I don't want to in any way be rebellious or disrespectful toward my government. But when my government comes against my faith, when my government begins to try to indoctrinate my children against me and my faith, that's when I stand up. And I'm encouraging everyone that you're watching this right now. This is a time not to be rude, not to be mean-spirited, not to be inappropriate, but it's a time to stand for your faith. This is a time for courage in very, very evil times when the government is trying to cause us to do something that is against our faith and trying to lead our children in ways that are against our faith. We need to stand up. We need to insist on respect. And if it comes down to it, and if some people are going to lose their jobs. If the Supreme Court sides with the Biden administration, there's going to be a lot of healthcare workers lose their jobs. And I'm saying I would lose my job before I would lose my faith. I would lose my job. I would take my children out of school and homeschool them before I would let them, indoctrinate my children and teach them against my faith. This is a time for courage. This is a time for resolve. I believe Jesus is coming soon. I hope very, very soon. But in the meantime, we are facing now a government that disrespects our faith, that we must stand against in an appropriate manner. We must stand against. I'm about to interview Dr. Mark Hitchcock on his book, ISIS, Iran, and Israel. And let me just show you a preview of this clip. So do you think that today Israel qualifies as a land of unwalled villages living in peace, or do you think that maybe it doesn't qualify yet for that?
Well, yeah, a lot of my friends that are, Bible teachers, prophecy scholars think they are. They say you go to Israel today, they're prosperous, they're living securely, they're at rest. But, there's people all around the country, soldiers getting on and off buses, everywhere you go, they're carrying weapons. I place the timing of this Gog-Magog invasion during the first half of the tribulation period.
Well, that interview is coming up. Now, we're about to go to the subscriber-only portion of the Tipping Point Show. And if you're not a subscriber, I would encourage you, $7 a month, $77 a year. We would love to have you become a subscriber because most of what we do now on the Tipping Point Show is for subscribers only. $7 a month, $77 a year. If you sign up for the monthly, the first month is free. So you can check us out here. I hope that you'll become a subscriber. If you are a subscriber, stay tuned. Now, you cannot watch the full program on YouTube. If you're a subscriber, you have to go to endtimes.com and go on there to watch the entire program or respond to the emails that we send to you as subscribers. But if you're a subscriber, stay tuned. I'll see you in just a minute. Welcome back. I am so excited today to have my special guest, Dr. Mark Hitchcock, joining me. He is the senior pastor of Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. He's also an associate professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, and he's written over 30 books on end-time prophecy, including the book ISIS, Iran, Israel, and the End of Days that we're going to talk about today. Dr. Hitchcock, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Now, you have written a lot of great books on the end times, and I've read, not all of them, but I've read a lot of them. Now, there's another book that you've also written called Russia Rising, Tracking the Barren Bible Prophecy, and we're going to be talking now about Israel, Iran. Now, this is something that you and I are both very interested in, is Israel and Iran. And so tell me, what is your take right now, because you have Iran now that's on the Golan Heights, Syrian Golan Heights, right on the border of Israel. They are very, very menacing in their language toward Israel. They'll wipe them off the face of the map if they can.
Sure.
According to Benny Gantz, the defense minister of Israel, they're weeks away from getting a nuclear weapon. So what's your take on all that?
Well, I think we need to put it in the biblical framework to start with. I'm sure you've talked about this on many of the programs, but we're talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39. Right. That's the kind of the biblical entry point really to talk about this. And it talks about an invasion of Israel in the end times by Russia and really a coalition of Islamic nations. Turkey, four of the places mentioned in Ezekiel 38 are in modern day Turkey. And when we look at Ezekiel 38, we're looking at ancient places, ancient place names. We don't find Meshach or Tubal or Magog on any map, but we're looking for the modern counterparts. And with Iran, of course, Iran is the worst actor really in the world today, and they're on the verge of getting nuclear weapons. Again, there's varying timetables on when that will happen, but it's sooner rather than later.
Right.
So you have Iran, and what you think about years ago, Iran and Russia both in Syria. Right on Israel's northern border, and it predicts an invasion of these nations from the north down into Israel in the end times. But you have Iran, of course, is there in the Golan in that area, which is right on the border of Israel. But also in Lebanon, they have one of their surrogates there, which is Hezbollah, which is constantly at odds with Israel. And then they also support Hamas, which is down to the west on the Gaza Strip area, which is just constantly sending rockets into the southern part of Israel. So really Israel in many ways in the north and in the south and that western area is surrounded in those areas. And Iran is just biding their time to wipe Israel off the face of the earth.
Absolutely. And they keep saying it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So Benny Gantz, who is the defense minister of Israel, he's saying now they're 7 weeks away from getting a nuclear weapon. And of course, they've already said once we get it, we're going to destroy Israel.
Sure.
They believe that Allah has commissioned them to destroy Israel and usher in the end times. So this is not just another nation that's a bad actor. These are people who are on a religious mission.
That's right.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's right. They have an eschatology or a view of the end times. They have their own view of the end.
Right.
With a Mahdi, this Messiah figure, who's going to come back in a time of great bloodshed and warfare, and he's going to come back and, of course, establish Islam and the worship of Allah all over the earth. And that's not the kind of people you want to get nuclear weapons.
No.
Who believe that their Mahdi is coming back in a time of warfare and bloodshed, and they believe that they can actually hasten his coming.
Yes.
So they're kind of like, put out the welcome mat for the Mahdi. Joel Rosenberg years ago described, again, the leadership in Iran. He called them a genocidal death cult.
Wow.
And that's a very strong term to use, but it's very accurate. Now, again, we're not talking about the Iranian people.
No.
We're talking about the mullah regime that's there. It's a genocidal death cult that wants to wipe out Israel above all. Israel's the little Satan, but the U.S. is the big Satan. So they hate both of us, and they believe that those are the two enemies that they need to eliminate. But of course, Israel's closer and smaller, so I think that will probably be certainly the first attempt they'll make. But I think Israel has said that they're not going to allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. General Dan Halutz years ago in Israel, several years ago, someone asked him, how far will Israel go to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons? And he said 2,000 kilometers, which is the distance from Israel to Iran. So they cannot allow them to get nuclear weapons. But Iran has been working overtime hardening these sites deep underground. I mean, they may have to use tactical nuclear weapons against some of these sites to really damage them. Israel has been involved in all kinds of sabotage through computers and introducing viruses that have tried to slow these things down. But they know that at some point in time, they're going to have to go there and make a military strike. Of course, Russia has been selling Iran advanced air missile defense systems, so it's going to be very difficult. Years ago, Israel hit several a nuclear site in Iraq, but they have to go twice as far to Iran. So it's a very difficult tactical decision to make. But I think that if they do hit Iran, which I think they will, that's going to sow seeds of more vitriol and hatred in Iran that I think will be the stage setting for what's here in Ezekiel chapter 38 of them wanting then at some point to come over and to strike Israel and to bring Russia and these other nations with them.
Well, and they're on the northern border. I mean, it's hard. It's just really hard to make this stuff up.
It is.
Because not all the actors, but the main actors now are going to be, we know, Russia. Now, talk for just a minute about the Afghanistan. Does that in any way add to the Gog-Magog scenario?
Well, I think it does, because in Ezekiel 38, one of the nations mentioned is Magog. And Magog is Central Asia basically today, and it's a lot of it's the underbelly of the old Soviet Union. A lot of people don't realize the Soviet Union, there were 15 different republics there that were all part of the Soviet Union. When it broke up, they all became independent nations. And I like to call these nations the stands. You have Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. But also included in that would be Afghanistan. So that's another stand to add. And just in those 5 provinces that used to be part of the Soviet Union, 60 million Muslims live there. Wow. And with what's happening in Afghanistan, we don't know when everything shakes out there who's going to ultimately be in control. Many are saying now there may be a civil war. But whoever it is, it's not going to be someone that's favorable to Israel. Right. You basically have ISIS-K, which is a kind of a new affiliate of ISIS that came about in Afghanistan and Pakistan. You have the Taliban, you have Al-Qaeda. They're all going to be jockeying for power. They may coalesce in some way, but they certainly would jump at the chance to join with Russia and Iran, these other nations, to come against the nation of Israel. So, again, that just another piece in the puzzle really that's coming into place in really the growth of Magog.
Well, let's talk about Russia for just a minute. Now, Russia is the chief among all of those. In fact, that's what Ezekiel says, Yes. And so they're really the chief, and they're the supplier of arms of almost every country that you could name that's a part of that coalition. They supply them arms. They're the thought leader in the sense that they're very aggressive. Okay, so I want you to talk for just in a little while about America in prophecy, because it's in your book here. But with Russia for just a second. So Ezekiel 38 and 39, it specifically says that they come for plunder. Okay, and now Israel has discovered, I think it's 30 trillion cubic feet of natural gas off their coast. So do you believe that Russia's interested in that energy there that's in Israel? What would be their interest in attacking Israel?
Well, I think their interest is going to be probably with their allies as well. They're very closely allied with Iran. They're very closely allied with Turkey. So it's probably going to be some kind of an alliance. It mentions these hooks in the jaws. It may be, again, an Israeli attack against Iran that festers over some period of time, and they want to get back at Israel. And, of course, they get Russia to help them. Russia, again, is already in Syria as well. Right. They're all there. Right. But the plunder they come to seek, the only thing we would know about in Israel would be these huge natural gas fields that they found. And of course, right now there's an abundance of energy in the world, but that could change very, very quickly. Sure. So they're going to come at some point in time allied with these nations. But it also mentions, though, as well, it says they come like a cloud against the land of Israel. They're going to come up against this land of unwalled villages. They'll come like a storm. So I think a lot of it, too, is just a desire to wipe Israel out. Right. I think, getting the plunder is probably a side benefit to that. But I think the ultimate is they hate Israel and want to destroy them and wipe them out.
So do you think that today Israel qualifies as a land of unwalled villages living in peace, or do you think that maybe it doesn't qualify yet for that?
Well, yeah, a lot of my friends that are, Bible teachers, prophecy scholars think they are. They say you go to Israel today, they're prosperous, they're living securely, they're at rest. But, there's people all around the country, soldiers getting on and off buses, everywhere you go, they're carrying weapons. I place the timing of this Gog-Magog invasion during the first half of the tribulation period. That's the most controversial issue really about this passage, is the timing of it. A lot of Bible teachers put it before the tribulation starts, maybe even before the rapture. The Left Behind series years ago had it even before the rapture. Yeah. But the only two times I know of in Scripture when Israel's going to be at rest and living securely is that first half of the tribulation, when they're going to be living under this guaranteed peace with the Antichrist, and then during the millennium. Well, we know it won't be during the millennium, because that's going to be a time of peace. So that's where I place it, but it could happen earlier than that.
Do you believe that in the aftermath of the Gog and Magog invasion, that's when the Antichrist would make the covenant with Israel, or would that have been made previously?
I think it will have been made previously. So I think, that covenant will trigger the 7-year tribulation. During the first 3.5 years, Israel's going to be living in this security. But I do think that when these nations come down into Israel, Russia, Iran, Turkey, all these other nations, and they're decimated there in Israel. I mean, it's literally a destruction of biblical proportions of their armies. That I believe could then set the stage for the Antichrist then to gain ascendancy in the world. So it's going to leave a huge power vacuum, massive power vacuum. So that could be what allows him then to come in and set up his world dominion, which will be that last 3.5 years of the tribulation when he dominates and rules the world.
So the scenario of Ezekiel 38 says that Sheba, the Dan, Tarshish, and her young lions basically will question. They will not join the coalition, but they will question them, saying, hey, what are you up to? Why are you coming down here? For plunder, whatever. So do you believe that the young lions of Tarshish are America? And do you believe that America has any prominent place in end-time prophecy?
I don't believe that this is America. If you did want to find America someplace, this would be the best place. People try to find America in the unnamed nation, like in Isaiah 18, or where the 10 lost tribes of Israel, or Babylon, or Revelation 17 and 18. There's all kinds of candidates people have in the Bible for America. If someone was to find a place, this would be the best place. It mentions, Tarshish and all the villages thereof. People will take Tarshish here sometimes to be Spain, which is Western Europe. Others will take it to be England and the nations that came out of England, of which America is a part. But to me, it's just a little bit too tenuous for me to make this concrete and say this is America. So I don't think America is mentioned in Bible prophecy either, certainly not directly, but even indirectly, which raises a question. If we are the great power that we are today in the world, certainly we would be mentioned. I mean, you would think. And people will say, well, America is so far away, it just kind of mentions nations in that area. It mentions the kings of the East, it mentions Russia. So it mentions faraway places. So that leads me to believe that something must have happened to America to cause us not to be the superpower that we are today.
Well, if you have, and I've looked at this from many different angles, but you have 330 million Americans today. Mm-hmm. And somewhere around 80 million say that they're evangelical Christians, or that they, born again, however you want to say it. Let's just say that half of them are telling the truth. Mm-hmm. Well, in a rapture, you would have 40 million people immediately missing, which would decimate a country, on every level. And so, to me, the rapture itself would take us out. But you look what happened just recently in Afghanistan. This is not our finest hour. We're declining. Yes. If something doesn't happen, we're militarily declining. As a culture, we're declining. just through all the things that are happening. So it's not hard to imagine for me, A, through the rapture, and just B, if things keep happening the way they're happening, we're just not the actor, we're not the power that we used to be.
No, that's right. I mean, we see the decay on every front. You have in Romans chapter 1 how God gives nations over, when they're involved in sin. I mean, I think we're seeing that now. It's kind of it's often called the abandonment wrath of God, where He abandons people to their own sin, their own way. It's tragic. I think we're seeing that happening. But you think about if the rapture were to take place in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, all the salt and light extracted immediately from our country. You talk about a drop on the Dow Jones the next day, and mortgages unpaid, and all of that taking place. But think about that maybe also happening in confluence with maybe a nuclear terror attack, or other things can happen. Our economy, sooner or later, with the debt we have, this bubble's gonna burst. So you take, the debt we have, some type of terror attacks, the rapture. You look at a lot of these things maybe happening in convergence, and America could be finished in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye.
Yeah. Let me get your take on a generation, because Jesus said the generation that sees these things will see all things fulfilled. And He was, that's in Matthew 24, He was talking there also about the tribulation.
Right.
And one of the key texts for me is Joel 3, where God says, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I'll bring all the nations down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, enter into judgment with them there on account of my people Israel, and they've divided up my land. And so it says, in those days and at the same time, when I bring them back, I'm going to enter into judgment with the nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat. So to me, those two texts where Jesus said the generation that sees this will see all things fulfilled, and then at the same time I do this, I'm going to do this. So a generation, according to Jesus, a generation is going to see the end time signs. Well, Psalm 90 says the days of a man's life are 70 years if by reason of strength they're 80. I'm 68, I don't like that scripture. And so that I'm not going to memorize that one. But it says 80 years. So let's say that a generation is 80 years. We've already had 73 years since the beginning, since Israel became a nation. Is any of that significant to you? I mean, does any of that cause you to believe that we are approaching the very end?
Well, I certainly see Israel as what I call the super sign of the end times. I mean, 1948 was pivotal, 1967 as well. Israel has to be in the land for this prophecy we've been talking about to be fulfilled in Ezekiel 38. They have to be in the land to be invaded. So Israel's certainly significant. I take the passage in Matthew 24, and He says, this generation won't pass away. I take that to be the generation that's alive during the tribulation.
Oh, really?
That's the people that are alive then. He's saying that generation won't pass away till all those things are fulfilled. Because previous to that, He says, when you see all these things, we're just talking about all these signs, which a lot of people put a lot of those signs, wars, rumors of wars, false messiahs, earthquakes into various places as happening today. I see those as signs of the second coming during the tribulation. These things are going to be just ramped up incredibly. Part of the reason for that is if you read Matthew 24, the first part of that, it parallels Revelation 6. Right. It's the same judgments. And Revelation 6 is clearly the tribulation. Right. So I think Matthew 24. So I see Matthew 24 as the birth pains, the immediate birth pains right before Christ's coming, these terrible judgments that come. And He says that generation that sees these things won't pass away until Christ comes.
So when Jesus said in Matthew 24, He's talking about that there would be pestilences, earthquakes, famines, and those were the beginning of birth pains. Yes. Okay, how do you view that as far as timing is concerned? Because obviously that's where we are.
Right.
We're seeing those things happen.
Right. I think those passages, that passage in Matthew 24, those statements that are made there are going to happen during the tribulation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I put that during the tribulation period. It's those birth pains that happen. And you see in the book of Revelation, you start with the seals, then the trumpets, the bowls, they intensify and they get closer together. But I read someone not long ago, and it was really good. He made a really good point. He said, what we're seeing today aren't the birth pains that are there, but these are the Braxton Hicks contractions, kind of the pre-birth pains. And sometimes, that can be kind of maybe, slicing a little bit thin. But I do think today that what we would see certainly are some birth pains before the real birth pains that come. But again, the reason I put Matthew 24, the birth pains there of false messiahs, wars, rumors of wars, pestilence, earthquakes, if you go to Revelation 6, it's the same order. It's the rider on a white horse, false messiahs, red horse, wars, black horse, famine. It's the same order. And in Revelation 6, almost everybody would put that in the future. Say that's, an end time prophecy. And I look at Matthew 24 as it's the mini apocalypse. It's kind of Jesus' concentrated version of that. So I put that there, but in the tribulation. But I do think that what we see today, we see a lot of the preview, the foreshadowing, the setup, whatever words you want to use, the build up to those things. To me, that's undeniable. Even people in our world today who don't even believe the Bible have this sense that our world's getting near closing time.
Oh yeah. I have people ask me all the time, and they'll say, well, I'm not a Christian, but what do you think is going on?
Yes.
And one of the things I love about Bible prophecy is you can contextualize the craziness in the world today.
Yes.
Without the Bible, how in the world do you ever, I guess unless you're a Muslim and you believe that you're, called to make all this trouble. But for a Christian, to me, it's so encouraging that we have a book telling us what's about to happen.
Right.
And so we can contextualize, because, COVID has been a massive worldwide curse. Hit every nation, hit every country. But the Bible said those things would begin to happen, before the end.
No, that's right. You look at 9/11, which the anniversary of that was recently. You look at COVID. To me, these are almost like a prophetic shift of gears. Right. There's like an acceleration when these things take place. When my wife and I were coming back from Israel last year, we were there when COVID was really ramping up. We got out of there on March the 13th, Friday, March the 13th last year. We were some of the last people to get out. It was empty. We were standing in the airport in Tel Aviv, getting on the plane. There was a guy in front of us. He'd been in one of the duty-free shops, 2 huge bags of vodka clanking together. The biggest bags of vodka you've ever seen. And just out of nowhere, it was strange. He turns around to me and he says, I think this could be the end of the world.
Oh, gosh.
And I began to talk with him about what the end of the world is and tell him about Jesus. And he turned around to his friend and started talking to him again. He didn't want to hear anything I had to say. But it was weird. This is a person clearly not a believer, but he just turns around to me, a total stranger, and says, I think this may be the end of the world. And that's the sense that people have, I think, today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so these kind of programs that we do, and I want to say, Dr. Hitchcock, thank you for being with me
Thank
today.
you. Appreciate it
Wonderful.
very much.
And I want to encourage everyone, this is the book, ISIS, Iran, Israel, in the End of Days. To get this book, it's a wonderful book full of a lot of information. You've heard just a tiny bit today. Also, the book, Russia Rising, is another one of his books. And so if you go on Amazon, you'll see over 30 books that he's written on the end times, a wealth of information. And stay tuned, we're about to do the question and answer segment. Well, I want to answer some of your questions. You guys write a lot of questions to us, which we love, and you ask some phenomenal questions. And so I want to get to as many of these as I can. This is from Melissa. Melissa says, my sister keeps saying Jesus can't come back yet because Jesus is coming back for a bride without spot or wrinkle. She believes the church has to be perfect. I have a hard time understanding this because the Bible also says, unless he comes back, no one will be saved. Could you please explain this? And she's talking about Matthew 24:22, and unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. When Jesus said that no one would be saved unless he came back, he's talking about everyone on the face of the earth would be wiped out physically unless he came back. This is the second coming. So this is not talking about salvation as in a person coming to Christ. This is talking about saving lives. The world would not be saved. It would be totally consumed unless Jesus returned. So this isn't talking about a perfect church. And the bad news I have for you is the church will not be perfect when Jesus returns. Now, Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. And so Jesus, we are his bride, and he is coming for us as our bridegroom. And he wants a beautiful bride. He wants a bride without spot or wrinkle or any such thing. So the Word of God in our lives purifies us and it prepares us for Jesus. So to the degree that we allow Jesus to minister his word to us, to the degree that we receive the word of God into our lives, is to the degree that we are more prepared to relate to Jesus today, but also for all of eternity. But the truth is, regardless of how discipled or sanctified or educated a believer is, we still will not be perfect until Jesus returns. This is 1 Corinthians 15. I say this, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible. And we shall be changed, for this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. And so this corruption will not change. This mortal will not change completely until Jesus returns. And it will be the grace of Jesus and the blood of Jesus and the presence of Jesus that makes us perfect and ready to relate to him in the eternal sense. Now, in this life today, to the degree that we are submitted to Jesus and to the degree that we are submitted to his word and receive his word, I mean, it obviously prepares us to relate to him today. It prepares us to see him one day when he returns. But we won't be perfect. So when your sister says that Jesus can't come because the church is not perfect, the church will never be perfect. We are imperfect people. We live in an evil world in sinful flesh. We can certainly live above that and rise above that by the power of God and by the presence of God in our lives. But even then, we are not perfect people. So yes, Jesus can come. He better come, because we'll never be perfect until he does. This is Terrence, and Terrence says, is the book of Revelation written in chronological order of events? It pretty much is. That's right. You begin with the revelation of Jesus, the letter to the 7 churches, and then you have the tribulation from Revelation 6 to Revelation 18. In the middle of that, Revelation 11 through 13 is mid-tribulation events that happen there. The death of the 2 witnesses, the temple that is there, the Antichrist, the abomination of desolation, all those events. And so, yes, it's pretty much written in chronological order. And so you can pretty much trust when you're reading it that you're reading through the events of the last 7 years of mankind from Revelation 6 onward. This is Jeffrey. Could the thing that be killed and is brought back to life in Revelation be referring to the caliphate? Is it possible that it isn't a person, but the resurrection of Al-Qaeda? No, it's not, Jeffrey, because the Antichrist is referred to many times in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul calls him the man of sin, the man of sin, the son of perdition. So the titles that are given to him, many of those titles are specific to an individual. And so the Antichrist will be one person on the earth who literally is Satan incarnate, who is a major, major figure there in the tribulation period of time. This is Keith. Why is it that most Christians do not participate in celebrating or even recognizing the holy days and feasts God gave us in Leviticus 23? As Christians, should we be recognizing and celebrating these festivals, keeping them holy? No, it's a part of the law. Now, I think that the feasts are special because it is a prophetic grid of the future, especially when you go to the Old Testament, talking about the crucifixion of Jesus, the burial of Jesus, the resurrection, Pentecost. We have 3 feasts that have not been fulfilled, that we will be fulfilled at some point in time: Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and also Tabernacles. So I think it's important to know about them. I think they're important for end-time prophecy. I think it's good to respect the Jewish calendar and things that happen on the Jewish calendar, especially as it relates to us as believers. But we are not under the law. We don't have to celebrate the Feast of Israel the way that the Jews did in the Old Testament. In fact, the Jews don't have to either, because if they're Messianic Jews, if they've received Jesus as their Messiah, they're also free from that. Doesn't mean that that's not special. It shouldn't be respected, but it just means you don't have to follow the Old Testament customs to be righteous or to be saved. This is Everett. Do you believe the mystery of the 7th trumpet in Revelation 10:7 is the event of the second coming? I'm very pre-trib, but have heard the argument saying that this is the time of the rapture. If it's not the rapture, what do you think the mystery is? Well, it's a mystery. I really don't know. And so it wasn't written down. The mystery wasn't written down, so we don't know. But here's what I do believe. If you go back to Terrence's question, Terrence is asking, is the book of Revelation in chronological order? And I said, yes, it generally is. And so this is the last trumpet, but there are still 7 bowls that are coming up. These are sequential, the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. So whatever the mystery is here, in Revelation 19, you have the second coming. This is the second coming of Jesus. After the bowl judgments, after a mystery Babylon is judged, then you have the second coming. And so Revelation 10 is a lot before that chronologically. So I don't know what it is, but I do not believe that it's the rapture or the second coming. This is Michael. I've heard some Bible scholars say that the Bible must be translated into every language before the rapture can occur. Is there scriptural backing behind that statement? Well, you know, Jesus said that the gospel we preached, Mark 13:10, the gospel we preached into all the nations before, and then the end would come. The gospel began with the Jews. When the day of Pentecost came, 100% of the church was Jewish. And then when Cornelius' house got saved, the Gentiles became a part of the church, but it started Jewish. Well, the gospel started with the Jews, it'll end with the Jews. When the rapture occurs, there will be 144,002 Jews on the earth preaching the gospel. It'll be the 144,000 that are mentioned in Revelation 7, Revelation 14, but also the 2 witnesses that are talked about in Revelation 11. And so they will be preaching the gospel. The greatest evangelist in the history of the world will be those Jewish evangelists that are alive during the tribulation. And it says, now this is Revelation 14, then I looked and behold a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters and like the voice of a loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the 4 living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. They are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb, and in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. To the 144,000, this is an eternal scene. They've already finished their ministry that they started in Revelation chapter 7 of preaching the gospel to every tribe, nation, and tongue on the earth. Right now, what people are doing to spread the gospel, what Bible translators are doing is phenomenal. It will continue until Jesus comes. But the 144,000, also the 2 witnesses, this is supernatural now. They will have the supernatural ability to reach all peoples on the earth with the gospel of Jesus Christ. You say, well, how are they going to do that? I don't know. I don't know if it's just supernaturally, if it's technology, however they do it. But God is going to give them the ability to reach the earth. And so the gospel began with the Jews. The gospel is going to end with the Jews. And there are going to be, I believe, hundreds of millions of people saved during the tribulation period of time, in a time of great difficulty. But they will have the gospel preached to them. And so it's important what's happening right now with Bible translation, all of that. But the Bible does not have to be translated into every language for Jesus to come. The only thing that needs to happen is the rapture. And when the tribulation begins, they're going to have 144,002 Jewish people on the earth preaching the gospel in a remarkable way. Hope that helps. Thank you guys for joining me today. I'll see you next time here on Tipping Point.